Good afternoon, everyone. Stephen with the Flint and Genesee Chamber of Commerce. I'm joined by Tyler Rossmissler, Director of Economic Development. Special guest today, Brian Calley. He's the president of the Small Business Association of Michigan, or SBAM. And you might be wondering, just right out of the gate, why all of us are in cars. And it's thanks to Brian. Brian, that's my first question for you. Why are you in your car?
Well, I do almost all of my meetings in my car, or at least the meetings where you can see what's going on around me, because like a lot of people went to 100% remote work back in March. And this is the only environment that I can control. What's going on inside my house is, if it might be entertaining for you to see, but it would also distract from the message of what we're talking about. And, when you take a Nerf ball to the face one too many times, it starts to hurt your credibility. So I'm in my car.
Goodness. And so the reason we're doing this is anyone that's watching a daily briefing every day at 3:30.
3 o'clock. Yeah, 3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. 30 minutes. It's really the best information that I've found, especially within that 30-minute time frame. So hats off to you and Brian. It's really great. I'm glad that you started it and you're continuing to do it even now. So thanks for joining us today in our cars. I want to hand it over to you first.
We're not driving.
Yeah, right. No driving. But I want to hand it over to you first.
Stephen, you're driving with your knee. You're a very talented person.
Multitasking. We had. Let me just sidebar. We had our regional leadership this morning, and the lieutenant governor was a guest of ours, and he was driving, but I think he had a driver. It was definitely multitasking.
He was riding.
Leveraging our commuter, so from Detroit to Lansing. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Brian, will you tell us just your thoughts? SBAM, what's going on in the state? What are you seeing as we reopen? Give us your general thoughts, and then we'll jump into some questions.
All right, sounds good. Well, first, thanks for the invitation to be here. It's great to connect with you guys. Of course, I spent a ton of time in your county and in Flint as well. About a year, my office was there in Flint. But there was there's so much happening right now. It's a very dynamic situation, and so staying on top of it has been a huge task for small businesses. And so what we're trying to do at SBAM is to be the go-to resource for the latest that has come out, and then we're willing to also do our best to interpret, sometimes with the gray area, to use our best judgment to help people understand what these rules mean, and also to anticipate rules that are to come. So a couple things to cover. Our state is divided into 8 different regions for the reopening process. For most types of business in 2 of those regions, which would be 6 and 8, that'd be the tip of the mitt of the Lower Peninsula and the entire Upper Peninsula, are essentially open with capacity limits, without many restrictions, except for big events at indoor venues and sporting events and arena style type stuff. That's not open, but pretty much everything else is with capacity limits. And the rest of the state is in what's called phase 4. And phase 4 is of course not the big events, but it's also not it doesn't include some of the indoor entertainment options like theaters, gyms, and fitness centers, along with like bowling alleys would be another example. But the governor has said, even yet again this morning, has said that she expects to move the rest of the state into phase 5 before the 4th of July. So pretty much everything with new rules and capacity limits is going to be open before the 4th of July, or at least the announcement of their opening will be made before then. So this is a really important time. It's an exciting time, but it's also a risky time for us. We're trying to encourage people to stay safe, to stay open. So Even, you get across the board, some people think, they don't like these rules, or they might think that the rules don't go far enough. And some people think this is blown way out of proportion. And others say, it's a really scary time. For our part though, as the business association, and also for our members, business owners, the rules are the rules, and they need to be followed and adhered to. And in our best defense on future closures, to make sure that we do this really, really well. So a few things that I wanted to touch on. First is that there is a more streamlined paycheck program, paycheck protection program forgiveness process that is coming out. So first look at what it was going to take to get forgiveness was pretty involved, but there's likely to be a streamlined process, and for at least for the smaller loans less than $2 million. Um, the the other thing is that if you remember way back to the beginning, there was something called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Fund, and the EIDL loans. And those were recently opened back up for applications. Now, they have a grant on the front end of it up to $10,000, but no more than 1,000 per employee, which really, they call it an advance, but it's like a grant. But then there's also, you can get a loan for wider purposes than the Paycheck Protection Program. But it is a loan. It has to be paid back. You can have more generous terms, low interest rate, and long amortization, in some cases out to 30 years. So that loan fund is open back up. It was closed for 60 days. So to the extent that people have working capital needs, keep that in mind. And the final thing I'll say before, and I'd be happy to take questions, talk about things that you're interested in. But when it comes to the rules of opening up, we like to think of them, the disease and risk mitigation steps, the same way that the regulators think of them. So, a lot of businesses have never dealt with MIOSHA before, and that's the Maine Workplace Safety Agency. And so it makes sense to know, how do they see these things, and so that's what we've been focusing on for the last month. And so a few main pillars across the board that everybody needs to know, and all these things build on each other. First is health screening. It's the most important and first line of defense. So all in the news, all they talk about, it seems like, is face masks and face coverings, but your most important first line of defense is health screening. There's nothing more effective than keeping people sick out in the first place. So that's the first thing, health screening. The second thing is distancing. And the expectation there would be more than just saying, hey, everybody, go back to work, try to stay 6 feet apart. Instead, what the expectation would be, you try to work distancing, engineer distancing into your workflow, so that it's not something people have to remember. It's a natural outcome of the way they do business. And then the third thing is disinfecting and sanitizing. So that would be commonly touched surfaces or tools, but it's also the person, your hands. So the idea of having a regular schedule. People wash their hands regularly, way more than they normally would before COVID-19. But then also those commonly touched surfaces, it becomes somebody's job to disinfect them multiple times a day. And the final thing, of course, is personal protective equipment, things like face coverings. But think about it: if you do good health screening, you do good social distancing, you engineer distancing into your process, and you have fidelity to a sanitation schedule, then you're not really asking all that much of that mask anymore. And that's the way it should be, because masks aren't perfect. They're required. They're good final or last line of defense, but you want to make sure that the things that you're doing ahead of time don't put too much burden on an imperfect tool like a mask. So I wanted to cover those things, and then just encourage everybody, make sure if you are open, if you have in-person work happening, you must have a COVID-19 preparedness and response plan. And SBAM has developed a template for that, the actual document that you can use. So it's not just a restart guide, but it's a template document that you can use. And you can have, it's for free. It's out there, open source for everybody. But you must have one of these. If you ever have an interaction with MyOSHA, say there's an employee complaint or something, the first thing they're going to do is ask you for this plan. So please have it. So I'll end the comments there, and I'm happy to talk about whatever's on your mind.
Brian, Tyler, I'm going to start with one question. Just personally, Brian, what are you experiencing? I've been in places that you see the shields, you see the masks, you see the PPE, it's all covered. In some places, not. I don't see the. What are you seeing? How are you feeling about? What are your members saying?
Well, we went out. We have 28,000 members, so it's hard to know what everybody's doing. But we've gone out and surveyed them to ask how they were feeling about the rules or requirements. Were they prepared? And we got a really high proportion back that said, we know the rules. We've got a great plan to follow them. We're ready to go. And even we had more that had a COVID-19 response and preparedness plan in place and ready than were open. So in other words, people were getting ready. They had it ready to go as soon as the governor said you can open. They wanted to make sure that they were ready. So I would say for those that are connected with us that have a good some good insight into what the rules are, that we feel very confident that they're ready, willing, and able to comply with the rules. What is maybe a little bit less predictable and something, if there's some piece of worry that I have out there, it's just the ongoing controversy on the general public. If you have the type of business where the general public comes into your operation, how do there's so much controversy over whether somebody wears a face covering, and so I know that business owners are very hesitant to ask their employees to stand in front of a person and say, no, you can't come in, and face that kind of confrontation. So we've got some work to figure out there in terms of how we handle customers. There's one thing we're used to dealing with is no shirt, no shoes, no service. I mean, that's a thing that,
Right.
especially up north in the beach towns and stuff, like, hey, you got to have your shoes on. Hopefully it's something that eventually turns into just kind of a generally regularly accepted practice. But right now, I do know there's some apprehension about the resistance that the general public has to wearing face coverings, and what that means in terms of compliance for the business who wants to make sure they stay on the right side of the regulators.
Thanks, Brian. Tyler,
Yeah, Brian.
got some questions.
So, Brian, yeah, we've got some prepared questions, but we're going to allow space for folks who are watching to chime in and ask Brian's questions themselves. But just to get things started here, since Stephen already got started, just to continue things, I was just wondering, Brian, from your perspective and the position you sit in, how would you rate, or how well are small businesses navigating this pandemic that has turned into an economic crisis? What's the state of small businesses in Michigan?
Well, again, we actually went out and surveyed and asked our members about this, and the results were disappointing but not surprising. The first was half of our members said that they'd had to do layoffs, and that's that's unprecedented. We keep in mind that most of the time, like a startup business is not going to join an association, so most of our members are second stage or more companies. They're companies that are mature, that get involved with an association. So that the fact that half of them were in a position where they needed to lay people off was concerning. But what was more concerning than that was in two surveys in a row, 14 and then 13% had answered when we asked them about their confidence of survival, were not confident that they were going to survive. And again, among mature second stage companies, like most of these are, that's a really high failure rate. And so we took it on as a mission. We got to make sure that that number does not come true. So there is a determination. There's a scrappy determination that business owners have, and if there's any way to survive, they're going to. So on the one hand, I have confidence that they'll do as well as you can, given the circumstances. But I am concerned about how many businesses are going to face this decision on, or are already facing that decision on, do we keep going or not? And so as we think about that, there's a tendency to think, okay, well, people are moving toward reopening. We're past that, but that's not the case. We're really going to be dealing with the economic fallout of this for a couple of years. And part of it will be because customer bases and capital got really depleted during this time. And so in the future, it makes cash flow more difficult. It makes expansion more difficult. It makes a whole host of just management challenges more difficult, because businesses are kind of feeling like they're back in the startup mode. And so that's part of it. The other part that I think will have just a long consequence to are the way that we as a society change because of this. And some businesses will be in a strong position to capitalize on that and do really well because of it. But there are many businesses who they're not going to be well positioned for how things change. And so I think there could be really big winners and really big losers in this process. So, an obvious one might be something like, say, retail, walk-in retail. There was already a trend toward online purchasing. All of a sudden, the adoption curve on online purchasing went straight up. We don't know whether or not people will go back and to more in-person person purchasing, or if they're going to keep on with this online that they did during the lockdowns. But there's so that's one of the more obvious ones. But think about like office space. So if we've all figured out how to work remotely, what impact will that have on office space utilization? Okay, so now you got people who own office space are really going to care about that. But take like where my office is, downtown Lansing. Let's say that 10% of office work, 10% more office workers work remotely than today. Well, there's a whole ecosystem of businesses that exist in that region to serve office workers. And to the extent that the amount of them in that region goes down by some significant amount, then it's going to have a ripple effect in all of those businesses in that area. These are the sorts of things that I think we really have to try to anticipate and get in front of, try to address. How is the world going to change? Who's vulnerable because of that change? And how can we help them bridge the gap between where they're at today and where they need to be in order to be successful in the post-COVID-19 future?
You were kind of hinting on it, and the question that I had written down, I think you've touched on it, but I just want to give you more opportunity. We hear a lot about consumer confidence, but I wonder if there's a trust factor. My wife and I want to go out to dinner, but we think maybe not, because I don't know if I trust the business or other people I'll be sitting next to or whatever. I guess the question of recovery, how much of that is dependent on trust? And specifically, what can a business owner do, or anyone in the general public, to help advance the ability to trust each other?
Yeah, great question. And I think this actually gets right to the heart of a part of that COVID-19 response or preparedness and response plan template. We had in there that we recommended that you create an employee task force on workplace safety, but I parlay that in because you want, your employees to be confident when they come in. If your employees aren't confident, how can anybody else be confident in your operation? And if your employees are really, if they've really bought into the plans and they can be consistent in the way that your customers now see your employees are well trained, they know exactly what they're supposed to do, they follow the rules with fidelity, it gives them confidence. But it's also about communication. And I'd really encourage people to go open source with what you're doing. So, and then communicate that. You're going to want to communicate it to your employees so that they're confident coming in, but also to your customers so they can be confident. And part of that is setting expectations. If you're going to be coming into our facility, our restaurant, our retail, whatever, setting expectations. Here's what you as a customer need to do so that you avoid the confrontation when they show up, if it's avoidable. And but then also to give them confidence, like, hey, here are the things that we are doing. Now you're going to have a lot of people that they're not too worried about it, right? So regardless of what you do, they're going to come in. But even them, you want them to follow the rules because the behavior of some customers is going to affect other customers' willingness to go visit your business. So that's why this stuff all really does tie together. People have been saying it's maybe overused a bit. We're all in this together. But the thing is, uh, whether you're really scared about this and you feel like you're at risk, or you feel like you're not a high risk person, and so you don't want to change a lot of what you do. But if you care about local businesses, then and you want them to be successful, number one, please go out of your way to support them. But number two, please do what you can do to create that environment in that business where everybody can feel comfortable going there and being safe, as opposed to making political statements. That's great. It's a great thing for like Facebook and for marches and stuff. But in terms of making a political statement at the expense of your local business, I mean, if it costs them other customers, is it worth it? Is that really the place to go to do that? So I think that communication can be really important. And for us in the business community, we need to be very nimble in assessing the situation where it's at, and be creative about ways to create the type of place that everybody feels comfortable visiting.
That's great. One more question, Stephen, and then I think we could go to Facebook and the other comments. Brian, what needs to be done from a legislative perspective? Did I?
Yeah, it froze up there a little bit, but you're asking
Did I freeze for a minute?
What needs to be done from a legislative standpoint?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lot that needs to be done. Number one is we really need to get some definition around who has what liability. So I'd put that pretty high on the list. I know there's been a little bit of controversy in DC about how much liability protection that you get, but really, so naturally I have some opinions on what the liability protection ought to be, but having some definition around it is important. Right now, there's just tons of questions. We really don't know. Like if a customer comes in and follows the rules or doesn't follow the rules, and there's exposure or not exposure, like whose liability is that? Those are questions that need to be answered legislatively. The other thing is with workers' compensation and the unemployment insurance trust funds. So those are funds that are paid for by employers, assessments on employers. Both have been very, very healthy in recent years. In fact, the unemployment insurance trust fund was the third strongest in all of America, after being the weakest in all of America a decade earlier. So it's come a long way, but at the current rate, it's going to be depleted, and so establishing policies to shore up the solvency of these two really important trust funds is going to be an important step for legislators to take as well. And then to the extent of that there's economic development. We really think that economic development needs to really be shifted toward helping businesses that are already here, not on attraction. For the next few years at least, the priority and the focus needs to be on the ones who are already here. And that's I don't mean that to be as a criticism for some of the attraction work that's happened before. They've landed some really good deals, but or really big deals, I should say. But really, the priority today needs to be we need to take care of our own backyard and make sure that we're doing everything that we can do for the ones that are here before we put more resources into getting others from the outside to come in.
Tyler, any follow-up to that? Wi-Fi issue, it seems. While Tyler works that out, I have a question here on our. Anyone who's watching who has a question, go ahead and submit it in the chat, and we'll share it with Brian. The first one: what can local municipalities be for business? And I have an example here. Flint Township has allowed free outdoor dining permit for restaurants. So, Brian, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great example. I've noticed that happening. I saw it with Flint Township. Traverse City is another one that is, they're actually closing down a street there to make more outdoor seating available to help restaurants survive. So those kinds of steps really, really important. I'd also just encourage you to think about streamline and uniformity with state requirements. To the extent that you have like local health departments, they have a ton of autonomy, and while there's always this debate about local control versus state, but to the extent that there can be some harmony, some consistency of rules and expectations between local governments, I think that would go a long way too. Because even if a business only has one location and it's in one municipality, chances are they're doing business across district lines, and so to the extent that we can have some level of consistency and uniformity would be in terms of expectations and requirements, especially in regulations. I think that will help business to be successful in this really trying time. And then to think about streamlining just what is necessary in order to make it as easy as possible while still getting the job done. These are regulatory agencies, but if you have processes that are really complicated and cumbersome and expensive, I would start with those first. There are enough challenges and hurdles in front of small businesses today. So the extent that you can try to streamline or accommodate that, I think that would be a positive step to help to improve the situation that small businesses especially are in, who don't have compliance staff and attorneys to navigate through all this stuff.
Tyler, I see you gave up on your car. Brian, I want to ask. I've mentioned Traverse City. I've seen Ann Arbor, their district. Have you heard anything? Is it going well? Is it, what could, I know that, like, for example, Flint is looking at this as an option, advice for our city as we try to navigate that.
Yeah, I think it's still it's very much in the early stages. So it's hard to assess how well it's working and what type of difference that it's making. But I do know that a lot of businesses they don't have space that could be converted just available. So the only thing that they have is common space. The only option they have is that. And I think that there is a strong desire to give it a go. So, obviously the weather has to participate or cooperate in order for that to be very successful. But outdoor seating is something that I think you're going to see much more common. Here's the other thing too, is that, it's turning out more and more data is coming back that being outdoor is a really safe place. Outdoors, really safe place to be, even when there's a lot of people around. And so when you speak to confidence, what is it going to take? I think there are some people who say, I don't want to go and sit inside a restaurant, but if they had some outdoor seating, maybe I'd give that a shot. I think giving those types of options to people, at least on the margins, is going to save some businesses. It's going to save some businesses that were kind of at a tipping point. Just get a little more business, can make it one more month, and hope that things get better.
Good. Katie Yellow is our director of placement here in the city, and I know she's watching. So I think that's a fair argument. It is a lot safer outside. And to address Tyler's point around trust, there's a lot less a restaurant has to do when you're eating outside compared to inside. Good thoughts. Tyler, do you, now that you're back, did you follow-ups on the legislative response that Brian gave?
Yeah, I apologize. I turned it into comedians in cars getting coffee a little bit with my dramatic exit. Hopefully I'm back here. No, the legislative issue that Brian discussed was pretty interesting. I know the state has already done some rapid response with the Michigan Small Business Relief Program, and I know the state legislature is looking to kind of beef up that program. I guess I don't want to. One thing that I think is interesting in the middle of this COVID is that there is some reshuffling of supply chains going on. I think companies are looking at their supply chains going, well, I got it all manufactured in Asia. Maybe I need some manufacturing here locally. And I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of that. And but I think you're exactly right, Brian, to say we got to focus on our small businesses because they're here, because they make, and I think it's more than just the fact that they're here. It's also they're what make our communities great. In a place like Flint or other communities here in Genesee County, we really think of the community in terms of small business. And so we start to lose an essence of who our communities are if we lose our small businesses. So I think that's a really good point, Brian.
Yeah, well said. I mean, that's the thing. It's the character of our local communities. These are the businesses where the business owner, their kids go to the local schools. They make their home in the community. Their employees are local community members. In some cases, their own family. I mean, so they small business owners treat their employees like family, and sometimes they actually are their family. And so it's it's a very intensely personal group of people, and they're the way that they're integrated into the local community is at a level that is so substantial and so personal. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is, like you mentioned supply chains, and I think that there is a great opportunity right now behind supply chain attraction. But here's the thing is, sometimes I think what's happened in the past is businesses take incentives because they're available.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if Ford or General Motors decides it's too risky for their suppliers to be half a world away and they want them closer, they're going to move closer. Right. I mean, I think sometimes what's happened is we assume that, hey, somebody's doing something new here, therefore the state has to give them money for that. And so I think it makes sense to look at, evaluate these situations and say, hey, this is a change that's happening anyway. And so what's really the priority for the resources? As you had mentioned, the legislature is talking about a pretty significant amount, $200 million for the state. That's a lot. To put into small business grants. That had happened before, as you know, and but it was about 10 million. There's 10 million in grants and then another 10 million in loans, but it just doesn't go that far. Considering how big our state is, 200 million, especially if you limit the amount to to smaller grants of say 10,000 or no more than 20,000, And for businesses that have certainly fewer than 100 employees, but maybe fewer than 50 employees, then that money is going to go a long, long way. And so that's what I think it's a good sign that the legislature and the administration are talking about a substantial amount of money and directed toward the smaller companies that maybe didn't fit as well into the federal programs as their bigger counterparts.
Yeah. And I guess, Brian, one thing I wonder if you're seeing this, one thing we're hearing a lot from our members and our clients is the need for working capital. And I'm wondering, what else are you hearing that businesses need besides working capital?
Well, part of it is the funny thing is when we would ask our businesses, what can we do? And people were nice enough to ask from the legislature, from the governor's office, what does small business need right now? And the answer has for months, it's been permission to operate, permission to try and get back into business. That's number one. So now as we're getting into that, and I think we're pretty close to having most of the rest of them opened up, except for those that are built around large events. So that's going to take a while probably to get those back in pre-COVID form. But so that's number one, is for the rest of them to have permission to open up. You'd touched on working capital. Paycheck Protection Program helped quite a bit with that, but most businesses are getting toward the tail end of that. So I wanted to bring up or suggest that any business out there who has not checked out Workshare with the unemployment system, please do. This is a really important tool that is relevant to a lot of businesses, where you can have employees called back part-time. So they're part-time on your payroll and then part-time on unemployment. And you can even arrange it to where they make more money that way, at least between now and the end of July, when the pandemic unemployment compensation run expires. And they're going to extend something. I just don't know what after the 25th of July. But that's a great option for people to take advantage of, and can help with that, with the cash flow getting back to work. The other part, though, is, there's uncertainty. So the more certainty that can be provided to a business owner to make decisions, the better. So that gets back into that liability question, some assurances on what's going to happen with presumptions on workers' compensation and the unemployment insurance trust fund, and what type of assessments that people can expect. And then I think easing back into deferments. I was really pleased recently when the Department of Treasury decided that the withholding and the sales and use tax remittances that were deferred, that you can remit those you can ease back into those. So and the next quarterly payment, people are going to have to make their quarterly payments. But those deferred payments from before, you can pay back over 6 months. And so those kinds of considerations will be important too. But really, it all gets back to that working capital or the cash flow concerns that businesses have. So everything that can happen to help with cash flow, to get back to a point where they got a normal amount of business coming in, gives that many more businesses a shot at survival.
Brian, we were talking about how these small businesses are intimately involved in our communities and so family oriented a lot of times. One thing we've heard a lot about unemployment is like, I don't want to bring them back. If I call them back, they'll lose their opportunity at making all this money on unemployment. But like you said, and so you have this company, you might have a small business that loves their employees so much that they don't want to bring them back because they're making good money on unemployment and able to take care of their kids or whatever the situation may be. And but the Workshare is a really good opportunity, at least for the next couple of weeks, where you can ramp back up slowly as everyone's kind of re-entering, and they can possibly make more money as long as that pandemic unemployment is available through the end of July. So
Yeah, it's a really good option. It's something that can help deal with exactly that issue you're talking about, especially if you have, for those employees that are making less than $45,000 to $50,000 a year, but we're full time before. Those employees, a lot of employers are they're hesitant to call their employees back if they know that it's number one, it's going to make them ineligible for unemployment going
Right.
forward, and number two, they'll make less money. So Workshare is just a good way to solve for that. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work out for every business and every employee, but it's actually going to be I think the exception to the rule, where Workshare doesn't ease cash flow and help the employee more.
Agreed.
Brian, anything top of mind for you before we wrap up?
Well, I want to encourage the businesses that are engaged in watching to think toward communication or over communicating as opposed to under communicating, and don't fall into the trap of thinking that your employees and your customers have the same risk tolerance that you do. I work with small business owners. Actually, I've worked my whole career. I've worked with small business owners, and I know that it's not a very risk adverse group, right? How could you be? If you're going to go into business, you are a risk taker, and so like this idea of like, hey, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to go after this thing, and just kind of head down, do the work. Communication is not necessarily the first thing on the mind of a small business owner who is not a communications professional. So the idea of over communicating with your employees and over communicating with your customers with respect for what you're doing, they'll let you know when they're good to go. And so and then the other thing is to go out of your way to solicit input as part of that communication. Because there are others, even employees that have been with you a long time, especially if they know you really well, there might be something they're kind of hesitant to talk about because they know that you as a business owner are you don't mind the risk, and so invite that conversation and do what you can during this transition time to make everybody as comfortable as they can possibly be, because we know that's tied to productivity later on. So all this stuff is not particularly complicated, but I think especially for small business owners where the business owner is wearing a lot of hats. They're the compliance officer, and they're human resources director, and they're the chief salesperson, and they're also the accountant, and they're the copy machine jam fixer. They do everything, and they have to know about all these things. So communication is not necessarily the first thing on the mind, and I think it really needs to be now.
You're totally right. Tyler, anything before we?
Thank you, Brian, for setting aside the time, and we really appreciate you being on this webinar and talking with us, and we appreciate your passion for small businesses in Michigan, and thanks for all you're doing. My
pleasure. Great to be with you guys. Mm-hmm. Good luck, everybody.
Again, thanks everyone for joining us. That was Brian Calley, president of the Small Business Association of Michigan. Tune in at 3 o'clock today for the daily brief. Brian, again, thank you. Everybody have a great day. Good one.